Have you ever needed mercy? When I was a kid, we used to play a game called Mercy. Do you remember the game? Two people would face each other and they'd clasp hands like this, interlocking their fingers, and somebody says go, and then both people try to bend the other person's hands backward as hard as they can until it really hurts. And of course, the only way to end the game is to scream mercy. You end the game by, in essence, crying out, I need mercy. Sometimes we need mercy in the form of forgiveness. We messed up and we hurt somebody we cared about, and we need his or her mercy to move forward. But mercy is other things too. Mercy can be something we need when we're in a bad spot that only somebody else can get us out of. Have you ever been in a spot where you needed mercy? I remember needing mercy when I went on my first missions trip to Haiti back in the early 90s, when the country was dealing with a shaky transition from a dictatorship to a democracy. And there are a lot of details for another time, but the basic summary of the situation is that the night before we were to fly back to the United States, an armed militia took over the government, bringing chaos to the streets of Port-au-Prince. And we missed our flight because the situation was too dangerous for us to try to get to the airport. But the next day, we decided to try to get out of the country. So our caravan of 21 people made it to the airport, where we weren't out of the woods yet because our airline tickets were for the previous day. So for 3 hours, we stood at the counter while our missionary host pleaded with the American Airlines staff. We needed mercy. And at the last moment, mercy was given and we were granted seats on the plane. And I found out later that it was the last commercial flight that went out of Haiti for the next 2 weeks. I was pretty grateful for mercy. Well, we're in week 5 of our series, Beautiful, where we've been journeying together through a series of blessings we call the Beatitudes. And these are at the beginning of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And we've talked about how the poor in spirit are blessed, as well as those who mourn. We've learned that the blessing extends to the meek and to those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And today we come to the 5th Beatitude, where Jesus declares, "Blessed are the merciful." Now, one of the most famous stories Jesus ever told, maybe the famous story Jesus ever told, is really a story of mercy. Let me read it to you. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite. Now, Levites were spiritual leaders who worked in the temple. And when he came to the place and saw him, he passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and he bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, and then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and he took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and he gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said, "and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have." This is the famous story of the Good Samaritan. But nowhere in the story is he actually called the Good Samaritan. The Samaritan, just 2 verses later, is called the one who had mercy. Now, this story, perhaps more than any other story, shows us what mercy looks like. And remember, Jesus says it is a blessed thing, a beautiful thing, to be a person of mercy. In this story, we see that the merciful see, that the merciful feel, and the merciful do. Say those after me. See, feel, and do. Let's take a closer look. This guy is traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. It's about a 17-mile stretch of road through really rocky desert country. And thugs had lots of places to hide and jump at people along this stretch of road. And after the guy is wounded, the first 2 people to come along, a priest and a Levite, they see this guy lying there by the side of the road, half dead, but they don't have mercy on him. Now, it's easy to make those 2 guys out to be cold-hearted. They're callous losers, right? Religious phonies. But maybe they didn't have mercy on the guy because even though they saw him, they didn't really see him. The truth is, all of us see people in real distress pretty much every single day, but we often see them without really seeing them. Maybe you're like me. When I think about people who need mercy, I tend to think about people I see on the news who are in just unfathomable circumstances. Whether they are Nigerian schoolgirls that are kidnapped by ruthless terrorists, or Sudanese women condemned to die for their faith in Jesus, or unaccompanied children fleeing the violence of their home countries. The issue at hand in every one of these news stories is one of mercy. But the truth is, mercy is not just needed out there in the global stories that come across our TV screens. We all cross paths with people in need of mercy every single day. They may be the checkout person at the grocery store who seems distracted, or a cranky coworker in the cubicle nearby, or someone in your own family who has messed up again. Sometimes when we see these people, we think we're seeing a person who just needs a good knock upside their head. That's what we think we see. But what we might really be seeing is a person in need of mercy. Now, often we get so wrapped up in our own worlds that we tend to see people without really seeing them. We all have our own agendas every day, and as we come into contact with people, I think we automatically see people in one of three ways: either as helpful to our agenda, as a hindrance to it, or as irrelevant to it. Now, I know that sounds harsh, but more and more I think it's true. We automatically see people one of three ways: either helpful to our agenda, a hindrance to it, or irrelevant to it. One of my favorite stories about this is a story that author Stephen Covey of The 7 Habits tells about a time when he was on the subway. And it happened to be a Sunday morning, and everybody was just peacefully drinking their coffee or reading their paper, except for this one guy with his kids. He gets on the car and he sits down beside Covey, and he's in a daze. And he sits there with his eyes closed and seems to be oblivious to his kids, who are totally bouncing off of the walls. I mean, they are yelling, they are fussing, they're making incredible ruckus. And the man just sits down next to Covey and he doesn't do a thing to get his kids in line. And then, of course, Covey is thinking, what a lousy parent this guy is to let his kids just run wild like that. So he decides to say something to the guy. As diplomatically as he can, he says, "Sir, your children really are disturbing a lot of people. I wonder if you could do something to control them a little more." Well, the man looks at Covey like he's coming out of this trance, and he says, "Oh, you're right. I guess I should. We just came from the hospital where their mother died about an hour ago. I don't know what to think, and I guess they don't know how to handle it either." And Covey concludes, he says, "Suddenly, I saw things differently. And because I saw things differently, I felt differently. Everything changed in an instant." You see, the priest and the Levite, they saw this man, but what they saw was somebody who was a hindrance to their agendas. I mean, they had places to go, they had things to do, and the reality of their religious affiliation specified that if they touched someone who was bloody, they would have to go through this special ceremonial washing, and that would have thrown a wrench into their whole day. So they saw him, but they didn't really see him. They only saw how he fit or didn't fit into what they had going on. Now here's the difference. The Samaritan looked beyond his own agenda, and he really saw this guy. He really saw this guy's need. Look at the text. You have three guys, and the same word is used: saw, and saw. But only one guy really saw the injured man. And Jesus is telling us that if we want to experience the blessedness of a merciful heart, we have to be willing to have God open our eyes, the eyes of our heart, and see people the way that He sees them. The merciful are those who see. Then Jesus says, And when he saw him, he took pity on him. Another translation reads, and when he saw him, he felt compassion. The merciful don't just see people in distress, they feel compassion for them. I mean, this feel part is tough for a lot of us because many of us are not naturally super tender-hearted people. You know, some people naturally feel for people. They're just wired that way. But most of us aren't like that. Then on top of it, we are just inundated with stuff about distressed people all the time on TV, in our Twitter feeds, as we walk down the streets of our city. I mean, we can get a little numb, even desensitized to it. And that's why I think it is just so incredible to see Jesus in these moments. I mean, he was a tremendous visionary leader, yet the pattern that describes Jesus' life was seeing people and feeling compassion for them. This word compassion literally means to suffer with someone. Wherever Jesus went, he saw people in distress, people in need, and he felt their need and their pain. I know this is an area of growth for me. You know, a few months ago, I was complaining to a mentor friend of mine about how frustrated I was dealing with a situation where some acquaintances of mine seemed to be self-centered and unreasonable. And my mentor listened to my point of view and my venting. But then she calmly challenged me with these words. She said, you know, yes, on the surface, that all seems ridiculous. But we have to remember that we have no idea what is going on in that family behind the scenes. And her words challenged me to not just deal with the facts of the situation, but to try to feel for the people involved. See, the truth is, when I stop to consider the pain another person might be experiencing, when I try to feel their pain, my heart can begin to soften with mercy. We can't always choose our feelings, but we can choose to say, Jesus, make me more and more like you. Help me to see, help me to feel what you want me to see and feel. And let me tell you, I think that is a prayer that God is going to say yes to every time. But the Samaritan didn't stop with feeling for the guy. He took action. See and feel are useless without do. Mercy isn't sentimentality. It is practicality. And the practical action is often the hardest because merciful actions cost us. Mercy always costs somebody something, whether that's time or hassles or money, you name it. I love stories where you see mercy put into action. I was thinking of some of the most merciful acts I've witnessed personally, and I thought of a friend of mine named Tim Shea who lives out in Washington State. And a number of years back, I think when he was in college, he signed up to be a bone marrow donor. Now back then, I'd never even heard of people doing that. Did you know that 70% of patients who need the transplant don't have a match in their own family? Well, years later, the donor registry contacted Tim, and he was a match for a person that needed a life-saving procedure to fight blood cancer. And Tim didn't hesitate to step up to the plate and donate his bone marrow for this stranger. Now, understand, this isn't a little thing. It requires an operation with long needles. And the median recovery time I looked up is 20 days. I can't remember how many days of work Tim missed because of this recovery period. But I do know this. Blessed are the merciful. Mercy cost my friend Tim an operation and recovery time. And it cost the Samaritan time and money. But notice this about how mercy acts. Mercy acts practically. It doesn't say in verse 35, and then the next day he took all the money he had and left his credit card number with the innkeeper and moved into the hotel himself to nurse this guy back to health, and he quit his job to take care of him. No, it doesn't say any of that. It says the next day he took out 2 denarii and he gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. That was saying, here, this should more than cover it, but I'll check back with you just in case it doesn't. There were limits. I mean, he was incredibly generous, but he wasn't stupid or codependent about it. He did something the man needed, and he was practical about it. And here's maybe the most important part of this mercy story. A lot of times we miss this part because we don't catch the twist that Jesus put in it by making the merciful person a Samaritan. You see, Jesus was speaking to people who were Jewish, and the Jews hated Samaritans, and the feelings were mutual. Samaritans hated Jews. I mean, they were bitter enemies. The history of hatred went back hundreds and hundreds of years. Sadly, we still see that kind of hatred in that part of the world today. To understand how Jesus' listeners would have heard this story about the Samaritan, imagine him telling it to a modern-day Israeli Jew, with the hero of the story being a West Bank Palestinian, or vice versa. You see, here's the kicker in mercy. Mercy sees, feels, and does for a person in need, even when you've got good reason not to. I mean, this person in need might be the neighbor who is mean to your kids, the coworker who stabbed you in the back, an ex-wife or an ex-husband. But their need is still there. And the merciful heart meets that need. Jesus once said, if you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? You see, even those we might perceive as our enemies, they need mercy. But why? Why be merciful? Why love those who don't love us? I mean, what's so blessed about being a person of mercy? Well, the answer lies in the second half of the beatitude that we're looking at today. Jesus said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy." The first understanding of this blessing is simply that what goes around comes around. I mean, is there anyone here who has never needed mercy, never needed help, never needed forgiveness? I mean, we've all needed mercy in the past, and we all need mercy in the future. Who is most likely to receive mercy from others? The ones who see, feel, and do. Those who extend mercy to others receive mercy themselves. If I want to receive mercy when I need it, how can I justify withholding it myself when someone else needs it? But the mercy that the merciful person receives goes beyond that. Jesus is saying that the ones who are merciful are blessed recipients of the mercy of God. We might even say that the merciful are the ones who already know what it is to have received mercy from God. You see, it's the experience of God's mercy in our lives that empowers us to extend an outrageous and absurd mercy to others. Check this out. All praise to God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. God is our merciful Father and the source of all comfort. He comforts us in our troubles so that we can what? So that we can comfort others. When they are troubled, we will be able to give them the same comfort God has given us. We can be merciful because we've been the recipients of mercy. How many of you saw Les Miserables when the movie came out a couple Christmases ago? You know, it is a story of mercy, probably one of my favorite stories of mercy. Jean Valjean is the main character played by Hugh Jackman in the film. And Valjean spends 18 years in prison for stealing a loaf of bread. And when he's finally freed, prison has gotten the better of him, and he becomes a hardened criminal. As an ex-con, he can't find work, but a kindly priest takes him in for the night. He repays this priest's kindness by stealing his sterling silver cutlery and taking off in the middle of the night. The police are suspicious of such a poor man with expensive silver, and they ask him where he got it. And he says that the priest gave it to him. So the police take him back to the priest's house and ask him to verify his story. As Valjean waits for the truth to come out that'll put him away for the rest of his life, the priest says, "Why, yes, I did give him the silverware." And turning to Valjean, he says, "But my friend, why didn't you take the candlesticks I gave you too? They are the most valuable." In the conversation that follows after the police leave, the priest tells Valjean that from now on, his soul belongs to God. Because of the mercy he received, Valjean spends the rest of his life extending mercy to those he comes in contact with, including Inspector Javert, whose obsession in life is to see Valjean behind bars for the rest of his life. Now, Valjean gets the chance to kill Javert during the French Revolution, but his soul belongs to God, and he lets him go free. Jean Valjean touches the lives of person after person in need, and at the end of his life, you can't imagine him being a more beautiful person. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the merciful, for they are the ones who live in the light of the incredible mercy shown to them in Jesus. The merciful know the blessedness of being able to say, "Our souls belong to God," because of God's sheer and brilliant mercy extended to them. The merciful person has mercy to give others because they have received mercy from God. See, feel, and do, because blessed are the merciful. They are the ones who will receive mercy.